The burgundy velvet box sat on the dining room table like an accusation. 23 years old. And I still felt the familiar knot in my stomach every time our family gathered for what should have been celebrations. My twin sister Thessaly unwrapped her gift with the practiced grace of someone who had never doubted she deserved beautiful things. Her manicured fingers sliding beneath the ribbon with deliberate slowness. I kept my own hands folded in my lap, already knowing what waited for me. The small, hastily wrapped package beside my plate looked apologetic, as if even the gift itself was embarrassed by its inadequacy. But I watched Thessaly's face light up as she lifted the car keys from their silk-lined nest, the BMW emblem catching the chandelier light like a promise of freedom I would never receive. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, pressing her hand to her chest in that theatrical way she had perfected since childhood. "Mom, Dad, this is incredible. I can't believe you actually bought it." Our mother, Cordelia Ravencrest, beamed with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly complex equation. "You mentioned how much you loved the color when we saw it at the dealership last month. Pearl white with a cream interior, just like you wanted." $50,000, our father added unnecessarily, as if the price tag somehow amplified the gesture. "But nothing's too good for our Tessie." Thessaly launched herself into their arms, and I watched this family portrait of joy from my position across the table, feeling like an observer rather than a participant. The irony wasn't lost on me that we had emerged from the same womb on the same day, yet somehow I had become the footnote to her main story. "Penelope," my mother said, turning to me with what I recognized as duty rather than enthusiasm, "your gift is there beside your plate, sweetheart." I reached for the small package, already knowing its weight would disappoint. The wrapping paper was different from Thessaly's, cheaper, the kind you bought in bulk rather than selecting with care. Inside was a bottle of perfume so generic it might have been labeled Woman Number 5 instead of whatever flowery name adorned the label. The price sticker was still attached, $4.99. "It's lovely," I said, "because that's what daughters do. Thank you." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken acknowledgments. Even Thessaly, flushed with her own excitement, seemed to recognize the grotesque disparity of the moment. She set down her keys and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Maybe we can go shopping together," she offered. "You can help me pick out accessories for the car." It was meant to be kind, but kindness delivered with such casual obliviousness felt worse than indifference. I smiled and nodded because the alternative was to scream, and screaming would only confirm what they already believed about me, that I was difficult, ungrateful, the problem child who couldn't simply be happy for others. "I should probably get going," I said, standing before the cake had even been cut. "I have an early morning tomorrow." "But we haven't had dessert yet," my mother protested, though her attention was already drifting back to Thessaly, who was scrolling through her phone showing the car photos to what I assumed were friends who would appropriately admire her good fortune. "Save me a piece," I said, gathering my purse and that ridiculous bottle of perfume. "I'll call you tomorrow." Nobody stopped me from leaving. Nobody noticed when I paused at the door. Looking back at my family clustered around Thessaly as she planned her first drive in her new car. Nobody saw me slip out into the October evening, carrying my $5 birthday gift and 23 years of accumulated understanding about where I stood in the hierarchy of their affections. The drive to my small apartment took 15 minutes, but I spent an hour parked outside, trying to process what had just happened. Not the gift disparity itself, because that was nothing new, but the casual cruelty of it. The complete absence of awareness that they had just demonstrated in the most public way possible exactly how little they thought of me compared to my sister. Thessaly and I had been born 7 minutes apart, but those 7 minutes might as well have been 7 years for all the difference they made in our parents' eyes. She was the firstborn, the one who had arrived with 10 fingers and 10 toes and a cry that sounded like music to their ears. I had followed, smaller and quieter, as if I had already learned that taking up space was something to be done apologetically. Growing up, the differences had been subtle at first. Thessaly got the bigger room because she was older. She got the newer clothes because she was more social, and people would notice. She got the better opportunities because she was the responsible one, the leader, the child they could count on to make them proud. I learned early that complaining about these inequities would only result in lectures about gratitude and sisterly love. So I became the agreeable one, the easy child who didn't make demands or cause problems. I worked harder in school, thinking academic success might earn me the kind of attention Thessaly received naturally. I took a part-time job at 16 to buy my own clothes, telling myself it was character building. I applied for scholarships and student loans to pay for college, while Thessaly's education was handed to her like another gift in a velvet box. The pattern had continued into adulthood. When Thessaly decided she wanted to be an interior designer, our parents helped her establish a business, providing seed money and connections. When I became a social worker, they asked why I had chosen such a depressing career that paid so little. When Thessaly bought her first condo at 21, they contributed to the down payment. When I finally saved enough to rent my own apartment, they wondered why I didn't just live with them longer and save money. But tonight had been different. Tonight they had stripped away any pretense of equal treatment and shown me with mathematical precision exactly what I was worth in their accounting system: $4.99 plus tax. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, thinking about all the birthdays that had led to this moment. The year Thessaly got a trip to Europe, and I got a gift card to Target. The Christmas she received jewelry, and I received practical things like socks and bath towels. The graduation where she was celebrated with a party, and I was handed an envelope with a $50 bill and told I had done well. My apartment was small but clean, furnished with pieces I had collected slowly over the years from thrift stores and clearance sales. Everything in it belonged to me, bought with money I had earned, chosen to reflect my own tastes rather than what someone else thought I should want. It was modest, but it was mine in a way that Thessaly's gifted condo could never be hers. I set the perfume on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. Such a small thing to represent such a large understanding. Then I walked to my laptop and did something I had never done before. I began researching what it would take to disappear from my family's lives entirely. Not dramatically, not with angry phone calls or tearful confrontations, just quietly, the way I had learned to exist in their world. I could change my phone number, find a new job in another city, create a life where I wouldn't constantly be measured against my sister's achievements, and found wanting, the idea felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in my life, I had the power to control how much of myself I gave to people who had consistently shown me how little they valued what I offered. Over the next few weeks, I began implementing small changes. I stopped calling my parents for our weekly check ins. When they called me, I kept the conversations brief and polite. I declined invitations to family dinners, claiming work commitments or other plans. When Thessaly sent me photos of herself with her new car, I responded with appropriate enthusiasm, but didn't engage in longer conversations. Nobody seemed to notice my gradual withdrawal. They were too busy celebrating Thessaly's latest achievements, her new business contracts, her social media following, her perfect life unfolding exactly as they had always expected it would. I found a therapist, Dr. Sarah Penbrook, who helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just sibling rivalry or normal family dynamics. It was systematic emotional neglect disguised as favoritism, a form of psychological conditioning that had taught me to accept scraps while watching someone else feast. You've trained yourself to need very little, she observed during one of our sessions, but that doesn't mean you deserve very little. There's a difference between being low maintenance and being discarded. The insight hit me like a physical blow because it named something I had felt but never articulated. I wasn't easygoing or selfless or mature beyond my years. I was a person who had learned to shrink herself to fit into whatever space was left after everyone else had taken what they wanted. I started making changes at work too. Instead of volunteering for overtime shifts that nobody else wanted, I began setting boundaries. Instead of accepting lower pay because I was grateful to have a job at all, I researched salary ranges and asked for what I was worth. Instead of staying late to cover for colleagues who took advantage of my reliability, I learned to say no. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. But slowly, I began to feel like I was inhabiting my own life rather than merely observing it from the sidelines. 3 months after the birthday disaster, I made a decision that surprised even me. I applied for a social work position in Portland, Oregon. It was a significant step up from my current job, with better pay and more autonomy. It would also put nearly 3,000 miles between me and my family. When I was offered the position, I accepted without consulting anyone. For the first time in my life, I made a major decision based solely on what I wanted, not on how it would affect others or what they might think about it. I gave my current employer 2 weeks' notice and began the process of disentangling myself from the life I had built in my hometown. It was surprisingly simple. I had few possessions worth moving, no romantic relationships to complicate, and a lease that expired at the end of the month anyway. The hardest part was deciding whether to tell my family about my plans before or after I left. The old me would have agonized over the decision, would have crafted the perfect explanation to minimize their disappointment or anger. The new me recognized that their reaction was not my responsibility to manage. I chose a middle path. 2 days before my departure, I sent a group text to my parents in Thessaly. I've taken a job in Portland. I'm leaving Thursday. I'll send my new address once I'm settled. The responses came quickly. My mother called immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. Thessaly sent a string of confused texts asking why I hadn't told them sooner, whether I was okay, what had prompted such a sudden decision. My father sent a single message. This seems impulsive. Are you sure you've thought this through? I didn't respond to any of them immediately. Instead, I finished packing my life into boxes and loaded them into the rental truck I would drive across the country to my new beginning. The drive to Portland took 3 days and gave me time to process the enormity of what I was doing. I wasn't just changing jobs or moving to a new city. I was stepping out of a role I had played for 23 years and into an identity I would have to create from scratch. Portland welcomed me with rain and possibility. My new apartment was bigger than my old one, with windows that faced east toward the mountains and south toward the city. My job was challenging in ways that energized rather than depleted me. For the first time in my adult life, I was working with people who saw my contributions clearly, who valued my insights, who treated me as a colleague rather than a convenient helper. I made friends slowly but genuinely, people who knew nothing about my family dynamics, who had no preconceived notions about who I was or what I was worth. They liked me for my humor, my competence, my willingness to listen. They invited me to dinner parties and hiking trips and book clubs, not because they felt sorry for me, but because they enjoyed my company. 6 months into my new life, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to constantly measure myself against my sister's achievements. I woke up each morning excited about my day rather than dreading another round of comparisons and disappointments. I bought myself things I wanted without justifying the expense to anyone. I dated a kind man named Marcus who brought me flowers because he liked the way I smiled when I received them, not because some occasion demanded the gesture. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening in April, my phone rang with a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer it. We had exchanged a few brief texts since my move, stilted communications that felt more like diplomatic correspondence than family conversations, but something in the persistence of the ringing made me pick up. Penelope. My mother's voice sounded strained in a way I had never heard before. Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. I'm here, I said, settling into my reading chair by the window. What's wrong? It's complicated, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. Your father and I need to see you. Can you come home? It's important. The old me would have immediately started planning the trip, would have rearranged my schedule, and booked a flight without asking questions. The new me was more cautious. What's this about, Mom? It's better if we discuss it in person, she said. Please, Penelope, we really need your help. My help? The words felt strange coming from her mouth. When had my family ever needed my help with anything? There's been a situation, she said vaguely, with the business and some other things. Your father doesn't want me discussing it over the phone. I looked around my apartment, at the life I had built without them, at the evidence of my own capabilities scattered across surfaces in the form of work projects and social plans and personal interests. I can't just drop everything and fly across the country, Mom. I have responsibilities here. I know you do, sweetheart, but this is family. The word hung between us like a challenge. Family. The same family that had given my sister a $50,000 car and me a $5 bottle of perfume. The same family that had barely noticed when I disappeared from their lives for 6 months. What kind of situation? I pressed. The kind that could ruin us. My mother said quietly, Please, Penelope, I know we haven't been. I know things have been difficult, but we need you. The conversation ended with me promising to consider the trip, but not committing to anything. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the rain streak down my windows and trying to make sense of what I had just heard. They needed me. After 23 years of making it clear that I was the unnecessary child, the afterthought, the one they could take for granted, suddenly they needed me. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so painful. I called Dr. Penbrook and scheduled an emergency session for the next day. I needed professional guidance to navigate whatever crisis had prompted my mother's uncharacteristic vulnerability. More importantly, I needed help figuring out how to respond in a way that honored the progress I had made without abandoning my family entirely, regardless of how they had treated me. "What do you think they want from you?" Dr. Penbrook asked during our session. "I don't know," I admitted, "but the fact that they're asking for help at all suggests something serious has happened." "And how do you feel about that possibility?" I considered the question carefully. "Conflicted," I said finally. "Part of me wants to help because they're my family, despite everything. But another part of me wonders if this is just another way for them to use my dependability without offering anything real in return. What would you need from them to make this worth your time and energy?" The question surprised me with its directness. What would I need? I had never allowed myself to think in those terms before. "Acknowledgement," I said slowly. "I'd need them to acknowledge how they've treated me. I'd need them to recognize that I'm not their backup plan or their convenient solution to problems they created without me. And if they can't offer that, then I walk away," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I've built a life here that values me. I won't go back to being invisible." Dr. Penbrook smiled. "That sounds like a person who knows her own worth." I flew back to my hometown the following week, but this time I approached the trip as Penelope Ravencrest, social worker and independent adult, rather than as the forgotten daughter seeking scraps of approval. I rented my own car and booked my own hotel room. I made it clear that I was visiting temporarily and had a return flight scheduled for Sunday evening. When I arrived at my parents' house, I barely recognized the place. The manicured lawn looked shaggy and unkempt. The luxury cars in the driveway had been replaced by a single modest sedan. Even the house itself seemed smaller somehow, less impressive than it had appeared in my childhood memories. My mother answered the door looking older than she had 6 months earlier, her hair less perfectly styled, her clothes less expensive. She hugged me with desperate intensity, as if I might disappear again if she didn't hold on tightly enough. "Thank you for coming," she whispered against my ear. "I know this isn't easy." My father appeared in the hallway, looking similarly diminished. The confident businessman, who had always seemed larger than life, now looked like exactly what he was, a man in his late 50s who had made some very serious mistakes. "Penelope," he said, extending his hand rather than attempting an embrace, "you look well." "I am well," I replied, accepting the handshake but not the emotional manipulation underlying his observation. "Portland agrees with me." We settled in the living room, the same room where I had opened my $5 perfume 6 months earlier. Thessaly was conspicuously absent, though I could see her BMW still parked outside. "Where's Tessie?" I asked. My parents exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know before they spoke a word. "That's part of what we need to discuss," my father said heavily. My mother clasped her hands tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. "Your sister made some poor financial decisions. Several poor decisions, actually." What kind of decisions? I asked, though something in their demeanor told me the answer would be worse than I was imagining. She took out loans, my father said, multiple loans, using our house as collateral. She told us she needed the money to expand her interior design business, said she had several large contracts lined up that would pay everything back with interest. How much are we talking about? $230,000, my mother whispered. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt my carefully maintained composure crack slightly as I processed the magnitude of what they were telling me. And the contracts? Turned out to be fabricated, my father said. She had created fake emails, fake company letterheads, fake everything. She convinced us she was on the verge of major success, that these loans were just temporary bridges to financial independence. Where did the money go? Another loaded glance between my parents. My mother started crying quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that looked like it had already seen extensive use. We don't know exactly, my father admitted. Some of it went to maintaining her lifestyle, the expensive apartment, the car payments, the designer clothes. Some of it disappeared into what we now understand was a gambling addiction we never knew she had. I sat back in my chair, trying to reconcile this information with the sister I thought I knew. Thessaly, the golden child, the responsible one, the daughter they could always count on to make smart decisions. How long has this been going on? We think about 3 years, my mother said through her tears. She's very good at hiding things, very convincing. She had us believing everything was wonderful right up until the bank called to inform us that we're about to lose the house. And where is she now? We don't know, my father said. She disappeared 2 weeks ago, left a note saying she was sorry and that we were better off without her. We haven't heard from her since. I looked around the room where I had spent so many uncomfortable family gatherings, trying to process this complete inversion of everything I had believed about our family dynamics. The responsible daughter had turned out to be a criminal. The reliable child had abandoned them when consequences arrived. The sister who had received every advantage had squandered it all and disappeared, leaving our parents to face financial ruin. How long do you have? I asked. The foreclosure proceedings start next month, my father said. We've tried to negotiate with the banks, but Thessaly forged our signatures on some of the loan documents. They don't care about our family situation. They want their money or they want the house. What about bankruptcy? Our lawyer says it might protect us from some of the debt, but we'd still lose everything. The house, our savings, our retirement accounts. We'd be starting over at 60 years old with nothing. I understood now why they had called me, not because they had suddenly realized my worth or because they regretted their treatment of me. They needed me because I was the only family member left who might be able to help them, and they had no other options. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. My mother leaned forward desperately. You're good with money, Penelope. You've always been so responsible, so practical. We thought maybe you could help us figure out a solution. I'm a social worker, Mom. I don't have $230,000 lying around. We know that, my father said quickly, but you understand financial planning better than we do. Maybe there's something we haven't thought of, some option our lawyer missed. I studied their faces, seeing desperation and hope, and the kind of vulnerability I had never associated with my parents. They looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, as if the revelation of Thessaly's betrayal had aged them years in a matter of weeks. "I need to see all the paperwork," I said finally. "Loan documents, bank statements, everything. I need to understand the complete scope of what we're dealing with." Relief flooded my mother's face. "Does that mean you'll help us?" "It means I'll look at the situation and see if there's anything that can be done," I clarified. "I'm not making any promises beyond that." We spent the next 4 hours going through boxes of financial documents, and the picture that emerged was even worse than they had initially described. Thessaly hadn't just taken out fraudulent loans. She had systematically looted their savings accounts, cashed out their retirement investments, and maxed out credit cards in their names. The total damage wasn't $230,000. It was closer to $400,000. Jesus, I breathed, staring at a bank statement that showed their savings account had been emptied over the course of 18 months. "How did you not notice this happening?" "She was handling our finances," my mother said quietly. "She said it would be easier if everything went through one person, that she had experience with business accounting. We trusted her." "You gave her access to everything?" "She's our daughter," my father said, as if that explained the complete abdication of financial oversight. "We never imagined she would steal from us." I set down the papers and rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The scope of Thessaly's betrayal was staggering, but what disturbed me even more was my parents' willingness to hand over complete financial control to someone else, even their own child. "Have you filed a police report?" I asked. "She's our daughter," my mother repeated, as if those 3 words were sufficient justification for allowing a criminal to escape consequences. "She's a criminal who has stolen nearly $500,000 from you and left you facing homelessness," I said bluntly. "Family relationship doesn't make that legal or acceptable." "We can't send our own child to prison," my father said. I stared at them, these people who had raised me to believe that Thessaly could do no wrong, who had spent 23 years demonstrating their unwavering faith in her character while treating me like an afterthought. Even now, faced with irrefutable proof of her crimes, they were more concerned with protecting her than with protecting themselves. "So what's your plan?" I asked. "Hope she comes home with the money? Wait for the bank to take your house and destroy your credit? Move in with relatives who probably can't afford to support you?" "We thought maybe you could co-sign a loan," my mother said hesitantly. "Help us refinance at a lower interest rate. Buy us some time to figure things out." "Co-sign a loan for $400,000? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "On a social worker's salary? What bank do you think would approve that?" "You have good credit," my father said. "Better than ours, certainly. And you're employed, stable." "I make $48,000 a year," I said. "Even if a bank were willing to consider me for a loan that size, which they wouldn't be, I'd be financially responsible if you defaulted. Given that you just lost $400,000 to your other daughter, that doesn't seem like a smart risk for me to take." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't apologize for them. These were the same people who had given me a $5 perfume for my birthday while handing Thessaly the keys to a $50,000 car. Now they wanted me to risk my financial future to clean up the mess she had made. "We understand it's a lot to ask," my mother said. "It's not a lot to ask," I corrected. "It's everything to ask. You're asking me to potentially bankrupt myself to solve a problem I didn't create, for people who have spent my entire life making it clear that I'm the less valuable child. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language, as if my hurt and anger were incomprehensible reactions to their request. "That's not fair, Penelope," my father said finally. "We've always treated you and your sister equally." Equally? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Did you buy me a $50,000 car for my birthday? Thessaly needed reliable transportation for her business. Did you contribute to my down payment when I wanted to buy a condo? You never asked for help. Because I learned early that asking for help was pointless, I said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked the backyard where Thessaly and I had played as children. I learned that everything I wanted, I would have to earn myself, while everything she wanted would be handed to her on a silver platter. "You're being dramatic," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. I turned back to face them, these people who had shaped me through their neglect as surely as they had shaped Thessaly through their indulgence. Am I? Let's talk about college. You paid for Thessaly's entire education, then gave her money to start her business. I worked 30 hours a week while carrying a full course load, graduated with $40,000 in student loans, and got a job immediately. When Thessaly dropped out of her first 2 attempts at college, you just kept paying. When I graduated summa cum laude, you didn't even attend the ceremony. We were proud of you, my father protested weakly. Were you? Because you never showed it. You never bragged about my achievements the way you bragged about hers. You never supported my career the way you supported her business ventures. You never even seemed to notice when I was struggling. My mother was crying again, but this time I didn't feel the familiar urge to comfort her. We didn't know you felt that way. You didn't know because you never asked. You were so focused on Thessaly's needs, Thessaly's dreams, Thessaly's future, that you forgot you had another daughter. I walked back to the couch and sat down, suddenly exhausted by the weight of 23 years of accumulated resentment. And now she's stolen everything from you and disappeared, and you want me to fix it. The daughter you ignored, the child you took for granted, the one who wasn't worth a decent birthday gift, she's your last hope. "We're sorry," my mother whispered. "We're so sorry, Penelope. We didn't realize." "You didn't want to realize," I said. "It was easier to believe that I was naturally independent, that I didn't need support or attention or investment the way Thessaly did. It was convenient to have one low-maintenance child so you could pour all your resources into the high-maintenance one." My father cleared his throat. "What do you want from us? What would it take for you to help?" The question hung in the air, loaded with possibility and danger. This was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire life, the chance to finally make them understand what they had done to me. But as I looked at their desperate faces, I realized that revenge wasn't what I wanted. Justice wasn't what I needed. What I wanted was recognition, acknowledgement, an honest reckoning with the choices they had made and the damage those choices had caused. I wanted them to see me as clearly as they had always seen Thessaly, to understand that I had value and deserved love, not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was. But more than that, I wanted to make a decision that honored the person I had become in Portland, the woman who knew her own worth and didn't need their approval to validate her existence. I wanted to choose my response not based on their expectations or my old patterns of people-pleasing, but based on what felt right for the life I was building. I need time to think, I said finally. This is a lot to process. How much time? My father asked urgently. The foreclosure proceedings start in 3 weeks. I'll give you an answer before I leave on Sunday, I promised. But I need you to understand something first. Whatever I decide, it won't be because I owe you anything. It won't be because family obligations trump my own well-being. If I choose to help, it will be because I want to, on my terms, with my conditions. I stood to leave, gathering my purse and the rental car keys. I'm staying at the Hampton Inn on 5th Street. I'll call you tomorrow when I've had a chance to think. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me. Penelope, wait. I turned back to see her standing in the doorway, looking fragile and older than her years. For what it's worth, she said, her voice trembling. You turned out to be everything we should have seen in you from the beginning. You're strong and independent and successful, and we're proud of you. We should have told you that a long time ago. The words I had waited my entire life to hear, and they came only when my parents needed something from me. I nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond, walking out into the evening air with the weight of their crisis and my own complicated emotions pressing down on my shoulders. Back in my hotel room, I called Dr. Penbrook's emergency line and left a message explaining the situation. Then I ordered room service, poured myself a glass of wine, and began making a list of my options. I could co-sign a loan, though the financial risk would be enormous and the likelihood of approval was questionable. I could offer them money from my own savings, though that would set back my financial goals by years and might not be enough to make a meaningful difference. I could help them navigate bankruptcy proceedings, which would protect me financially but would leave them essentially destitute. Or I could walk away entirely, let them face the consequences of their choices and Thessaly's crimes, return to my life in Portland, and let the chips fall where they may. Each option carried its own moral weight, its own implications for the future of our family relationships. But as I sat there in that anonymous hotel room, looking out at the city where I had grown up feeling invisible, I realized that the most important decision wasn't what I would do for them. The most important decision was what I would do for myself. Dr. Penbrook called me back within an hour, her voice warm with professional concern, even though it was past her usual office hours. I got your message. How are you holding up? I'm not sure, I admitted, curling up in the hotel room's uncomfortable armchair. Everything I thought I knew about my family has been turned upside down. The sister who is supposedly perfect has destroyed them financially, and now they're asking me to save them. And how does that feel? Like the universe has a twisted sense of humor, I said. For 23 years, I was the expendable child. Now I'm their only hope. What are you leaning toward? I was quiet for a long moment, trying to articulate thoughts that felt too complex for words. I keep thinking about the person I was 6 months ago versus the person I am now. 6 months ago, I would have immediately said yes to whatever they needed, probably would have figured out a way to co-sign that loan even if it destroyed my financial future. I would have seen it as my duty, my chance to finally prove I was worthy of their love. And now? Now I realize that kind of love isn't worth having. If I have to bankrupt myself to earn their affection, then their affection isn't real. That's significant growth, Penelope. but I'm still struggling with the guilt. They're my parents, regardless of how they've treated me. If I have the power to help them and I choose not to, what does that make me? Dr. Penbrook was quiet for a moment. What do you think it makes you? Practical, self-preserving, maybe even wise. I paused, testing how those words felt, but also possibly cruel, or maybe just human. Maybe just someone who has learned that she can't save people who won't save themselves. After we hung up, I spent the evening researching bankruptcy law and foreclosure procedures, trying to understand my parents' options without my financial involvement. The picture wasn't entirely hopeless. They would lose the house, but they could potentially discharge most of the debt and start over. It would be difficult at their age, but not impossible. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with a proposal that surprised even me. I've made a decision, I announced as we settled once again in their living room. But before I tell you what it is, I need you to listen to some conditions. My mother nodded eagerly. My father leaned forward with the focused attention of someone whose financial survival depended on the next few minutes. First, you're going to file a police report against Thessaly. What she did was criminal, and treating it as anything less enables her behavior and prevents her from facing the consequences that might actually help her change. Penelope, we can't. I'm not finished, I said firmly. Second, you're going to seek professional financial counseling to understand how you ended up in this situation and how to prevent it from happening again. Third, you're going to attend family therapy with me because the relationship patterns that created this crisis aren't just about money. My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with these requirements. And fourth, I continued, you're going to acknowledge publicly and explicitly that you treated Thessaly and me differently throughout our lives and that this differential treatment was wrong and harmful. That seems excessive, my father said. Does it? You want me to risk my financial future to clean up a mess that was created, in part, by your decision to give one child unlimited resources and access while teaching the other child that she had to earn everything herself. The least you can do is admit that your parenting choices had consequences. My mother was crying again, but this time her tears looked different, less desperate, more thoughtful. You're right, she said quietly. We did treat you differently. We told ourselves it was because you were more independent, more capable, but really, it was because it was easier to indulge Thessaly than to set boundaries with her. And easier to take me for granted than to invest in me, I added. Yes, she whispered, and we're sorry, truly, deeply sorry. And my father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Assuming we agree to these conditions, what exactly are you proposing to do? I'm going to loan you enough money to prevent the foreclosure and buy you time to get your affairs in order. $60,000, which is everything I have in savings, plus what I can borrow against my retirement account. It's not enough to solve all your problems, but it should be enough to keep you from losing the house immediately. 60,000? My father looked confused, but the total debt is 400,000, I know. The 60,000 is to bring your house payments current and pay the most urgent debts. The rest you're going to handle through bankruptcy proceedings, which will discharge most of what you can't pay. But that will ruin our credit, my mother protested. Your credit is already ruined, I pointed out. At least this way, you'll have a roof over your heads while you rebuild. I pulled out a folder of documents I had prepared. This is a formal loan agreement. You'll pay me back $500 a month for 12 years, which works out to $72,000 total. The extra $12,000 covers the interest I'll lose by withdrawing my retirement money early, plus a small cushion for the risk I'm taking. My father reviewed the paperwork with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to sign financial documents without reading them thoroughly. "These terms are more than fair," he admitted. "They're more than fair because I'm not trying to profit from your crisis. I'm trying to help you stabilize your situation without destroying my own financial security." "Why?" my mother asked. "After everything we've put you through, why would you help us at all?" I considered the question carefully because I wanted my answer to be honest rather than simply generous. "Because you're my parents, and despite your mistakes, I don't want to see you homeless. Because I've learned that forgiveness is something I do for myself, not for other people. And because I want to break the cycle of dysfunction that's been running through our family for decades." "What about Thessaly?" my father asked. "If she comes back?" "If she comes back, she faces criminal charges. That's non-negotiable. And she's not welcome in my life until she's completed a rehabilitation program and made genuine amends for what she's done." My parents agreed to my conditions, though I could see the struggle in their faces when it came to filing charges against their golden child. We spent the afternoon at the police station, where they filed a formal complaint for financial fraud and embezzlement. The detective assigned to the case explained that finding Thessaly might take time, but that her financial crimes had left a clear paper trail. "People think they can disappear in the digital age," Detective Rodriguez told us, "but money leaves tracks. She'll surface eventually, and when she does, we'll be ready." The process of transferring the money and negotiating with creditors took 3 weeks. I extended my stay in town, using vacation time I had accumulated and working remotely when possible. My parents' financial situation was even worse than they had initially revealed, but we managed to create a plan that would allow them to keep their house and discharge most of their debt through Chapter 7 bankruptcy. During those 3 weeks, something unexpected happened. My parents began to see me differently, not as the reliable child they could take for granted, but as a competent adult whose help they genuinely needed and appreciated. They started asking for my advice on matters beyond their immediate crisis. They began sharing information about their lives that they had never bothered to discuss with me before. My mother told me about her own childhood, growing up with parents who had favored her older brother so obviously that she had spent her entire youth feeling invisible. "I swore I would never do that to my children," she said, "but somehow I ended up repeating the same patterns." My father admitted that he had seen himself in me more than in Thessaly, and that my independence had reminded him of struggles he preferred to forget. "It was easier to celebrate Thessaly's successes than to acknowledge your strength," he said. "Your achievements reminded me of how hard everything had been for me at your age." These conversations didn't erase 23 years of differential treatment, but they provided context that helped me understand their choices, even if I couldn't forgive them entirely. The breakthrough came during our third family therapy session with Dr. Martinez, a woman in her 50s who specialized in family financial trauma. She had a gift for asking questions that cut through denial and forced honest conversations. "Penelope," she said during one session, You've described feeling invisible in your family. Can you give your parents a specific example of what that looked like? I thought for a moment, then shared a memory I had never spoken aloud. When I was 16, I won a statewide essay contest. The prize was $500 and a scholarship consideration for college. I was so excited to tell my parents, but when I got home, Thessaly was crying because she hadn't made the cheerleading squad. My parents spent the entire evening comforting her and planning how to help her try again next year. I never got to share my news. How did that feel? Dr. Martinez asked. Like my achievement didn't matter, like I only existed to provide support for Thessaly's disappointments. My mother covered her face with her hands. I remember that day. I remember Thessaly being upset, but I don't remember you trying to tell us something. Because you weren't listening. You were so focused on her emotional needs that you didn't notice I had emotional needs too. What would you have needed from us that day? Dr. Martinez asked. Celebration, recognition, 5 minutes of attention that wasn't about my sister. And my voice cracked slightly. I needed to matter to you as much as she did. The silence in the room was profound. Finally, my father spoke. We failed you, not just that day, but consistently, for years. We taught you that your value was in what you could do for others, not in who you were as a person. Yes, I said simply. You did. Can you forgive us? My mother asked. I'm working on it, I said honestly, but forgiveness is a process, not a switch I can flip. You'll have to earn it through changed behavior, not just apologies. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. That's a healthy boundary, Penelope. Forgiveness without accountability isn't really forgiveness at all. 3 days before I was scheduled to return to Portland, Thessaly called. I was having coffee with my parents at their kitchen table, reviewing the final bankruptcy paperwork. When my mother's phone rang, she looked at the caller ID and went pale. It's her, she whispered. Answer it, I said. Put it on speaker. My mother's hand shook as she accepted the call. Thessaly? Where are you? Are you all right? I'm okay, Mom. Thessaly's voice sounded hollow, defeated. I'm in Phoenix. I heard about the police report. How did you... I still have friends in town. Word gets around. Thessaly was quiet for a moment. Is Penelope there? I'm here, I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush. I'm so sorry, Penny. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for things to get this bad. But they did get this bad, I replied. You stole $400,000 from our parents and left them facing homelessness. I know. I lost control. The gambling, the debt, it all spiraled so fast. I kept thinking I could win it back, that I could fix it before anyone found out. And when you realized you couldn't fix it, you ran away instead of asking for help. Because I was ashamed. Thessaly's voice broke because I knew I had destroyed everything and I couldn't face what I had done to our family. What you did to our family was steal from them. I said bluntly, what you're doing to our family now is abandoning them when they need support dealing with the consequences of your choices. I want to come home, Thessaly said quietly. I want to try to make this right. Then you need to understand what making it right actually means, I said. It means turning yourself in to face criminal charges. It means entering a treatment program for your gambling addiction. It means getting a job and paying back every cent you can, even if it takes the rest of your life. And it means accepting that you're not the person we all thought you were, my mother added, surprising me with her directness. The perfect daughter, the responsible one, the child we could always count on. That was an image we created, and you lived up to it until the pressure became too much. I never asked to be perfect, Thessaly protested. No, I said, but you accepted all the benefits that came with that image. The money, the support, the constant forgiveness of your mistakes. You can't claim the privileges of being the favorite child while rejecting the responsibility that comes with that position. The conversation continued for another hour, with Thessaly gradually accepting the reality of her situation and the requirements for returning home. She would drive back to town, surrender herself to police, and begin the long process of rebuilding her life from the ground up. "Will you be here when I get back?" she asked me directly. "I'll be here for the surrender," I said. "After that, I'm returning to Portland. If you want a relationship with me going forward, you'll have to earn it the same way you'll have to earn Mom and Dad's trust again." How do I do that? By showing up consistently, even when it's hard, by being honest about your problems instead of hiding them, by contributing to solutions instead of creating more problems. I paused, thinking about my own journey towards self-worth, by proving that you value our relationship enough to do the work required to repair it. Thessaly arrived home 2 days later, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that was a far cry from the BMW she had once been so proud of. She looked thin and tired, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a plain t-shirt. The transformation was startling, as if the glossy exterior that had defined her for so long had been stripped away to reveal someone more fragile and human underneath. The surrender process was painful but necessary. Thessaly confessed to the full scope of her crimes, providing bank records and account information that helped investigators understand how she had moved the money. Her cooperation would likely reduce her sentence, but she was still facing significant jail time. "I kept telling myself I was borrowing it," she said during her confession, "that I would pay it all back with interest once my luck turned around. But deep down, I knew I was stealing from you." "Why didn't you ask for help?" my father asked, the pain evident in his voice. "Because I was supposed to be the successful one," Thessaly replied. "The daughter who had everything figured out. How could I admit that I was failing at the one thing I was supposed to be good at?" "Being perfect isn't a thing people are good at," I said. "It's a performance that becomes impossible to maintain." "You never seem to struggle with it," Thessaly said, looking at me with something that might have been envy. "I was never expected to be perfect," I replied. "I was expected to be invisible. Those are different pressures, but they're both damaging." My last evening in town, my parents and I had dinner together at their kitchen table. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the truth had cleared away years of accumulated tension. They had agreed to sell some of their possessions to help pay down debt, and the living room looked sparse without the expensive artwork and furniture that had once defined their status. "I'm proud of you," my father said as we finished eating. "Not just for helping us through this crisis, but for becoming the person you are, strong, independent, successful on your own terms." "I wish we had told you that 23 years ago," my mother added. "I wish we had seen your strength as something to celebrate instead of something to take for granted." "Me too," I said, "but I'm glad you can see it now." "Will you visit again soon?" my mother asked. I'll visit, I promised, but our relationship going forward has to be different. I'm not the backup plan or the crisis manager or the reliable child who fixes everyone else's problems. I'm your daughter, and I deserve to be treated like someone you value for who I am, not just for what I can do. We understand, my father said, and we'll work to earn that kind of relationship with you. The flight back to Portland felt different from my arrival. I was returning to my life not as someone running away from family dysfunction, but as someone who had faced that dysfunction directly and established new boundaries. The outcome wasn't perfect, but it was honest in a way our family relationships had never been before. Marcus met me at the airport, bringing flowers and the kind of smile that reminded me why I had fallen for him. During the drive home, I told him about everything that had happened, the financial crisis, the difficult conversations, my decision to help my parents despite their history of treating me poorly. Do you regret it? He asked as we sat in my apartment later that evening. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty of that answer. I'm glad I helped them, but I'm even more glad that I helped them on my terms. For the first time in my life, I made a major family decision based on what felt right to me, not on what they expected or needed. That's huge, he said, pulling me closer. 6 months ago, would you have been able to set those kinds of boundaries? 6 months ago, I wouldn't have even known I had the right to set boundaries, I admitted. I thought family obligation meant sacrificing yourself for other people's comfort. And now? Now I know that healthy family relationships require mutual respect and effort. Love isn't enough if it's not backed up by behavior that demonstrates care for everyone involved. 6 months later, I received a call from my mother with an update I hadn't expected. Thessaly had been sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation and restitution requirements. She was also participating in a gambling addiction treatment program and had been writing letters to our parents and me, asking for forgiveness and outlining her plans for making amends. She wants to see you when she gets out, my mother told me, but she said she understands if you're not ready for that. I might be ready eventually, I said, but it will depend on whether she's actually changed or whether she's just learned to say the right things. How will you know the difference? The same way I knew the difference between your apologies and your actual changed behavior, I said, by watching what she does, not just listening to what she says. My parents had been making their monthly loan payments reliably, and their bankruptcy had been finalized with minimal complications. They were living more modestly than before, but they seemed happier, more present in their interactions with me. Our monthly phone calls had become actual conversations rather than status updates, and they had started asking about my life in Portland with genuine interest. I'm thinking about proposing to Marcus, I told my mother during one of our calls. That's wonderful, she said, and I could hear the genuine excitement in her voice. Tell me about him. So I did. I told her about his work as a teacher, his love of hiking, the way he made me laugh even when I was having bad days. I told her about our plans to travel together, our shared interest in social justice work, the comfortable routine we had established in our relationship. He sounds perfect for you, my mother said when I finished. He's not perfect, I corrected, but he's real and he sees me clearly, and he loves me for who I actually am instead of who he thinks I should be. That's better than perfect, my mother said quietly. Marcus proposed 3 months later during a hiking trip to Mount Hood. It was simple and private, exactly the kind of proposal I had always imagined. When I called my parents to share the news, they were genuinely thrilled in a way that felt unforced and natural. "Can we contribute to the wedding?" my father asked. "Nothing extravagant, but we'd like to help." "You can contribute your presence," I said. "That's what I actually want from you." We planned a small ceremony in Portland with Marcus's family and a few close friends. My parents flew out for the weekend, and for the first time in my adult life, they seemed completely focused on me and my happiness rather than managing other family dramas or obligations. During the rehearsal dinner, my father stood up to give a toast that surprised everyone, including me. "I want to talk about my daughter Penelope," he said, raising his glass. "For too many years, I took her strength for granted and failed to celebrate her achievements. I assumed that because she was capable of handling whatever life threw at her, she didn't need support or recognition from her family." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about that, and I'm grateful that she gave us the chance to do better. Penelope, you've taught us that love isn't just about good intentions. It's about showing up consistently, treating people with respect, and recognizing their value. Marcus, you're getting an extraordinary woman, and I hope you never forget how lucky you are." The toast was everything I had ever wanted to hear from my father, and it came at exactly the right time. Not when I needed it to feel worthy, but when I could receive it as confirmation of worth I had already claimed for myself. Thessaly was released from prison 2 weeks after my wedding. She called to congratulate me, and for the first time in our adult lives, we had a conversation that felt genuinely equal, rather than filtered through family expectations. "I'm proud of you," she said, "not just for the wedding, but for everything, for building a life that makes you happy, for setting boundaries with our parents, for helping them even after they had treated you so badly." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you," she continued, "but I hope someday we can be sisters again, real sisters, not just people who happen to share DNA and childhood trauma." "I hope so too," I said, "but that's going to take time and consistent effort from both of us." "I understand. I have a lot to prove, and I'm prepared to do the work." A year later, Thessaly and I met for coffee during one of my visits home. She was working 2 jobs, living in a small apartment, and slowly paying back what she could of the money she had stolen. She looked healthy and clear-eyed, in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me. "Helping them when they had treated you so unfairly for so long?" I considered the question carefully. "No, I don't regret it, but I think the important thing is that I helped them because I chose to, not because I felt obligated to. That made all the difference. I'm trying to learn how to make choices instead of just reacting to circumstances," she said. "It's harder than I expected." "Most worthwhile things are," I replied. We talked for 2 hours, and for the first time since we were teenagers, I felt like I was getting to know my sister as an individual rather than as a symbol of everything I wasn't. She was funny and insightful, but also struggling with genuine remorse for the damage she had caused. She was working to rebuild relationships that she had damaged, but she wasn't expecting immediate forgiveness or trust. "I understand now why you left for Portland," she said, as we were preparing to part ways. "You needed to become yourself outside of our family dynamic. I wish I had been brave enough to do something like that before everything fell apart. It's not too late, I told her. You're rebuilding your life from scratch now. You get to decide who you want to be going forward. Looking back now, 5 years after that terrible birthday dinner, I can see how everything that felt like destruction was actually reconstruction. My parents' financial crisis forced them to confront the consequences of their parenting choices. Thessaly's collapse required her to face her addiction and take responsibility for her actions. My own exile to Portland allowed me to discover who I was when I wasn't constantly measuring myself against someone else's achievements. The family we became isn't the family we were, but it's a symbol of a time when I accepted scraps and called them enough, when I believed that my worth was determined by other people's opinions rather than my own choices and actions. Sometimes people ask me why I helped my parents after they had treated me so poorly for so long. The answer isn't simple because it involves understanding the difference between enabling and supporting, between obligation and choice, between fixing people and creating space for them to fix themselves. I helped them because I could afford to, both financially and emotionally. I helped them because walking away would have felt like betraying my own values, not because I owed them anything. I helped them because I wanted to break the cycle of dysfunction that had defined our family relationships and that required me to model the kind of behavior I wanted to see from them. But mostly, I helped them because I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by their recognition or appreciation. I could afford to be generous because my generosity wasn't contingent on their gratitude or changed behavior. I was giving from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, strength rather than desperation. The woman who left that birthday dinner in shame and anger was a different person than the woman who returned 6 months later to negotiate her family's financial crisis. The difference wasn't in my circumstances or my bank account or my professional success. The difference was in my understanding of my own value and my right to protect that value through boundaries and choices that honored who I had become. That understanding didn't come from my family's recognition or apologies, though those things were healing when they finally arrived. It came from the hard work of building a life that reflected my authentic self, from creating relationships based on mutual respect, from learning that I deserved love that didn't require me to shrink myself to receive it. The $5 perfume reminds me that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us exactly where we need to be. Sometimes being forgotten forces us to remember ourselves. Sometimes being undervalued teaches us to recognize our own worth. Sometimes being the afterthought child becomes the catalyst for creating a life where we're the main character of our own story. My family learned that lesson too, in their own ways and on their own timeline. But I learned it first, and that made all the difference